Hello and welcome to Beyond Games with me, John Jordan. This is a YouTube channel all about what happens next for games. Please subscribe. So today I'm just looking at a kind of a piece of news, actually two pieces of news that caught my eye, and that is about loot boxes. So loot boxes, I guess most of us gamers know, are basically boxes in games that you buy and there's a sort of random drops in there. So there's a randomness. You spend maybe 100 coins in the game and it says you have a 1% chance of getting a legendary item and you have a 99% chance of getting a common item, something like that. So that's what loot boxes are. And there was some research came out from this company called Juniper, and it said loot boxes set to generate $20 billion by 2025. Now, actually, to me, that seemed like a low figure. So at the moment, the games industry is doing about $170 billion of annual global revenue. And mobile games is about $70 billion of that, and all mobile games is all free-to-play revenue, and a lot of that will be loot boxes. So this, to me, seems quite a small number. I'm not going to kind of quibble the figures. I guess most people would think this is quite a lot of money. $20 billion. I guess it depends exactly how you define loot boxes. There may be some things that we think are loot boxes that are not defined exactly as loot boxes in this research. But anyway, loot boxes are valuable. And obviously, it's not just on mobile games. We've had lots of obviously FIFA is a game that gets a lot of attention because of loot boxes and other big console games. Loot boxes are a thing that people like to talk about, whether they're good or bad or whatever. So anyway, that was just the kind of the centerpiece, I guess. So we've got this lots of money, and 5% of players are expected to purchase loot boxes. That also seems a little bit low to me. I guess there's lots of players, certainly on mobile, who never pay anything at all. So we always have this idea that like 99% of players in mobile games never pay anything at all. So maybe that's where it comes from. This is not very clear, is it, this graph? But anyway, this geographical breakdown says the Far Eastern China, which I guess is this kind of whatever colour that is, rusty colour. That's suggesting that is the majority. So that's over half of the revenue. But this is what's interesting here, I guess, is we have this other story going on also today. Germany wants to add loot box warning to video game rating. So this story was actually a bit more aggressive when it first came out. So we had here, original story, German authorities will consider legal reform that could force an 18+ age rating on all video games with loot boxes. So this would obviously mean that in Germany, if this happened, in Germany it would be illegal for an under 18-year-old to play a game with loot boxes. Because if you had a loot box in your game, it would force an 18+ rating, and obviously for something like FIFA, that would be that would basically be catastrophic, because Germany clearly one of the big European markets for soccer games. But now it seems, whether this is lost in translation, we have an update here. So the Bundestag, which is the German Parliament, has amended its announcement about the passing of reforms for Youth Protection Act to remove mention of loot boxes. So now it seems that there may be loot boxes may be added as a warning to the general video game rating warning. It has this kind of a nice kind of thing here, cost traps, which again may be a translation from the German. But I should point out there is currently no indication that video games with loot boxes will be rated 18+. The other thing, obviously, if loot boxes are rated 18+, that will impact the German game developers in particular. And there are a lot of German game developers. So potentially there might be some internal lobbying going on here. And anyway, this is just this has not been passed yet. This is not law. So it says here it's got to be approved. But it could, if it was approved, it could happen quite quickly, but we now know it seems like it's not going to be an 18+ age rating. But in general, this shows, I think, two things. That loot boxes are increasingly important for the games industry, and governments are increasingly worried about loot boxes. So again, this is sort of nothing new. So we had back here in 2018, Belgium, I'll move myself out of the way, Belgium made video game loot boxes illegal. So this wasn't an 18 rating thing. They basically said they looked at their gambling laws and they said loot boxes were gambling. So technically they're not illegal, but if you want to run loot boxes, if you want to run a game with loot boxes in Belgium, you have to apply the gambling laws. You have to have a gambling license, and that's really expensive. So most games companies just don't allow their games to actually be available in Belgium if they have loot boxes. Similar thing in Holland. So there is this kind of interesting, there's two kind of things here. One is sort of, does the random element of loot boxes mean they're gambling, and so the loot boxes fall under existing gambling law. There's equally there is kind of worry about youth protection, about whether loot boxes sort of encourage people to do sort of gambling type things, and that might then encourage them to do real gambling. Obviously, the main reason we would argue, or people would argue, that loot boxes aren't gambling is you spend money to buy something in a loot box, and it is an in-game item. You then can't go and sell that on for real money. Whereas obviously in gambling, you put in $100 and you might win $1,000 or whatever the thing is. And the scary, addictive thing about gambling is as you lose money, you want to win more money back. So the fact that it's real money, it becomes the kind of main psychological aspect of the gambling. There are even in the UK, there are definitely people who would argue that that loot boxes are a new kind of form of gambling. So they don't think that gambling requires kind of real money to be a reward system. That has yet to be agreed, but there is, I would say, there's increasing momentum behind that from various kind of lobbies. So I'm not going to really discuss whether I think that's right or wrong at the moment, but clearly there's pressure, and we have seen it even in China. So we have China and the Far East as this biggest area for loot boxes. In China, they have not so much banned loot boxes, but they've limited the amount of time under 18s can spend playing games. In Japan, they've limited the amount of money under 18s can spend in games. So in general, so there are everywhere. I think that governments are looking at legislation around games, the amount of time young people, particularly under 18, spend in games, and increasingly now they are looking at how much they spend and how they are being encouraged to spend. So we can see there is starting to be this kind of tension between how the game developers are making money in their games, or how some of them are, and the success of this model, the kind of the free-to-play loot box model, is very successful. It plays into some kind of deep psychological aspects in how our brain works in terms of reward systems, and we are seeing people worried about the wider impact on that. So sometimes, I guess, in the games industry, we see this kind of upward trend where games are making more money over time, and it seems unstoppable, and probably would seem to be unstoppable. I think if more legislation came in, games companies would probably think of other ways of monetizing potentially. But it could, if say like the US government brought in a law, then you could see a big change, almost overnight, at least for a period of time. So it's just for us to be aware in the games industry that we don't kind of sit in our little bubble making games and doing whatever we want. Obviously, there is legislation, and as the games industry gets bigger and as it impacts more people and more people play games, older people play games more. What we might think of professional people, lawyers and politicians play games as well now. Then obviously we become more. There's more opportunity for legislation to start coming into the games industry, which we've never really seen before. So anyway, that was the little news nugget for today. Please subscribe to the channel if you're interested in the future of games. But thanks for watching this video, and see you again soon.